Good afternoon and welcome to our very first in this run of community webinars, organised with the good folks here at Thirst. In each of these sessions, we're going to be talking about sort of a key thing L&D professionals should be focusing on right now. In each session, I'm going to bring on a different expert guest, not just to talk us through the theories and the ideas, but most importantly, to get into the nitty gritty and talk about how we practically get stuff done. In this first session, we're lucky enough to have with us Vice Chair of the Learning Network and founder of Align Learn Do, Neil Cunningham. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us today.
No, Tom, thank you very much for having me. And love the little nod to the Learning Network there. Completely forgotten about that and the enormity of the role, but it's very exciting and very much forward to doing the vice chairship.
Fantastic. Well, let's not waste any time. I know none of you are here to listen to me, just generally fill space as I tend to do. So let's dive into the topic we're all here to talk about, data storytelling. Please do, throughout this session, jump into the comments, get in your questions, your thoughts, your ideas, or just tell us where you're coming from. Really, let's be honest, we just want engagement because this is LinkedIn. But no, more seriously, we would love to make sure we cover the topics that matter most to you. So do come in with any questions about how you can use this or if you've tried to do so before. Before we dive into the content, we've kind of done a brief who's who. But Neil, tell us a little bit more about kind of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Neil John Cunningham. As Tom said, Vice Chair of the Learning Network, but also I run a small N&D consultancy called Align Learn Do. We focus on three things mainly. One is custom built workshops. So we try and build specific workshops for specific needs. We work with smaller businesses to help set up and guide their first L&D functions, or we work with like SME and enterprises to enhance their current L&D offering. And a common thread through all of those is this idea of data storytelling. It's about understanding how you can find the value in the work that L&D does, whether or not it's a program of workshops or setting it up or enhancing your current offering, and playing that story back to the business so you will hopefully gain further investment in all the lovely L&D things that you want to do.
Brilliant. So with that, I kind of want to dive straight into our
Sure.
first big question. What is data storytelling? We talk about data a lot
Yep.
right now. I think it's it's not a buzzword, but it is almost reaching that stage in of itself without some context. So talk us through exactly what we mean by data storytelling.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way I like to think about it is that it starts off with data. Okay, so yeah, it seems simple enough, but it's how you gather and use that data. So where are you going and looking in the business and what data is important to the business and its people? So quite often I'll start looking at things that sit outside of people or L&D. So we'll be looking at sales information, customer service scores, projects, timelines, budget overspend. So things that the business goes, oh, actually, there's something here that's not quite right. So it's gathering that data together. And then it's using it to inform how you design learning, right? So think of that end-to-end piece and whether or not you're going to do LTEM or Kirkpatrick or a lovely mishmash of your own stuff. It's how you use that data to design learning that's going to be measured, right? And once you've run the program, how do you replay the story of the successes and the failures and what you want to do next and all that lovely stuff? So it's about bringing those things together and, yeah, playing back to the business a story that's emotionally compelling and data informed.
Brilliant. So then that gives us really a solid foundation to start from because I think often, and this is probably an oversimplification, but I'll use myself as an example. In the earlier stage of you must become more sort of data informed, data driven, all the different language around that. All that immediately came to my mind early days was numbers, spreadsheets of data, needing to put together graphs, needing to get to an absolute number that I could give the board for the sake of argument and say, this, we delivered this number. And I think this idea of putting it into a story, I think it makes a lot of sense because the response I got, and I'm not sure if you've ever kind of seen it or done it yourself, is that the numbers were either way too much or not enough simultaneously. Is that kind of leaning into this kind of thinking?
Yeah, I think you can actually, I was about to say you can present a fact. A fact is a fact, and let's take something quite easy to report on. I think that's an interesting or an important differentiator here in data is, are you just reporting on something, or are you analyzing it and then telling the story of what you're going to do with the data that you've got? So quite often someone will have an idea of what they think is happening within the L&D department and the impacts the L&D team are having. And that's not the truth. That's not actually what's happening. And so you're presenting someone and you're kind of rubbing up against their belief, or you're causing friction, should I say, between their beliefs and what's actually happening. And that causes this cognitive dissonance where they go, okay, the world as I see it isn't true. Am I in a position to accept that? Or am I going to push back and say, well, that can't possibly be true, to your point? And yeah, I've had that. I think one of the advantages of creating a story and viewing what you are doing as an end-to-end process and educating people around it is it can break down that resistance to accepting that things might not be as they particularly view them at the moment.
I think that almost perfectly segues us into the next question. That wasn't planned either. I snuck that in as an extra question, and it kind of has made the jump quite nice. Nice. Which is, when and why is data storytelling the right solution? Because like everything, right, nothing is the right fix for everything. Not everything's a hammer and nail situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to take it back a step. What's more trying to say? I think, yeah, right solution. There's a couple of reasons why or when this might be right. And I think the first one is if you yourself want to understand more about what data is usable. So this, from an individual L&D practitioner point of view, you could go, oh, is there an opportunity for me to look around the business and go, what's some performance-based data that might be interesting to base a hypothesis for a program of learning on? So that's a good reason when it might be good and why it might be good. I think another when and why is when you're dealing with a kind of mixed set of stakeholders, some who are very passionate about raw facts and data, and some are very passionate about emotional storytelling. But you need to somehow get both of those different types of people on board with a solution, and you might have a kind of restrictive amount of time in which to do that. So you can get two people in a room and run something through quickly. So I think that's another reason when and why data storytelling might be the right solution. And I think the final bit is understanding what story you want to tell. So, for example, you might be that you've got a set of stakeholders who just really care about how people felt about it. Like, I know a lot of people call that a vanity metric, and I certainly went through that phase of going, it's a vanity metric, not going to report on it. It's very trendy a fair few years ago. But actually, the more work I've done with more senior people is they've come to me and gone, Neil, if my people love this, that's my measure of success for this. Right? And so you go, oh, okay, so that's something, that's the right story to tell there. And then I've had other people that go, you absolutely need to get to an ROI because I'm not spending all of this money on this to not see a monetized return on investment. And so I think saying, is it the right solution, is just understanding about what's the right story to tell more than it being the right solution.
Okay, so there's a couple of things there that I think are quite interesting that I want to dig into a bit further. And I think Laura raises a really good point that she likes the distinction between reporting and analyzing. And I think that's probably a good place to start, actually, because often we do think of data as more of a reporting tool. I think it's about, the example I immediately gave, going to the board and saying, look, we did a thing and here's the proof. You touched on there that kind of ability to analyze and use it as a practitioner. Can you talk a little bit about when and why you might want to do that as an L&D practitioner rather than just looking at data as a reporting tool?
Yeah, I think you'd want to do it because you want to look beyond the now and into the future. That's slightly esoteric there. Let me break that down. I've just confused myself with my own answer. I think at the beginning, when you're starting out on this journey, or any L&D function starts being asked, they're always asked to report on. Is the initial place, and it's because a lot of people analytics still focuses on that, whether or not it's a colleague experience model or engagement survey. The first thing is, oh, let's report on it. Oh, actually, these 9 things are great, so we're not going to do anything about that. We'll focus on this bit where our scores aren't high. And the same with learning. So actually, we put this thing on and 100 people attended and 90 said they love it. So we'll just keep running it, right? Because it's a solution in a high pressure environment, right? You're running at stuff, you're under budget, you're under resource, so you go, oh, that's fine, we'll just leave it. And so actually what we tend to then focus on is, let's look at the thing that's broken. Great thing to do. No one's saying don't do that, because it's indicative from the data that we've got. But actually, that's just reporting it. It's not going, well, we looked at this and we found that people had reported a really low score, let's say, or loads of people failed the assessment for this, right? For let's say we have an assessment within our learning design and we go, oh, we better change the assessment. Okay, that's the first instinct. But actually, the second instinct would be to analyze, why did people fail it, and go back to the cohort and go, what was stopping you from applying what you'd learned in the sessions into this assessment? If the assessment was the wrong mode, I didn't have time to complete it, I was on holiday for 3 weeks, none of the questions made any sense, I didn't attend the training. So actually, it's whenever you get the data, rather than just reporting it, is to look and ask that question, what has caused this report? And what we're going to do about it if we do need to do something about it.
Interesting. So that kind of leads me into the other thing I want to touch on then, which is vanity metrics. Because I think this is, you're right, it was definitely trendy to be very anti-vanity metric. I totally did that. Where do you see value in them? Because I think it's fair to say there's potential value in everything, right? But where specifically, when we talk about, you know, kind of the classic happy sheet is the easiest example of vanity metrics in L&D, I always think. Where do you see the value in that?
First, I don't think we should call them vanity metrics. They're just metrics, right? It's a number we've decided to measure. Yeah. So take your own bias out of it. It's just a metric. And then I think depending on the organization or what you want to achieve is when they can be useful. So let's take feedback surveys, which can be riddled with biases and can be entirely dependent on how the questions are structured or when the person is filling it in. You know, I've certainly been in training sessions back in the day where someone's put a sheet of paper at like the lunch break and gone, oh, can you fill this in while you eat? And you're like, it'll be great if you gave me 5 out of 5. You're like, okay, cool. Yeah, so they can be hugely biased. So it's, you know, so you have to understand, how we're going to remove bias from the reporting in this. That's important. But if they have value to a stakeholder and it's going to get that stakeholder to take you more seriously for the next thing you do, or it's going to gain you more investment so that you can continue to experiment and build a great L&D offering, then I think it has a real value. And that might seem slightly, what's the word I'm searching for? Cynical way to view it. But I think quite often, a lot of the time is, you know, if we always choose the hard battles, we're going to get worn out. And sometimes if you can find something that is quick and simple to produce with a clear metric that someone understands and doesn't need loads of explaining to contextualize, that's going to allow them to go, that was great, run it again, or here's some extra investment, or here's the time you need, or here's the tool you want, then I think it's a good metric to include.
And I think there's a really sort of practical and useful message in there as well around we have a tendency, I think, in L&D. There's the classic kind of L&D on LinkedIn is like William Wallace charging across the field, and L&D back in the office is the dude with the red stapler from Office Space, right? And there is something to the fact that at the end of the Braveheart story, well, Wallace doesn't get to continue in his L&D career or his, you know, takeover of the country career in his case. There's a limit maybe to how much we should be like, but fundamentally I disagree with you and so I shall not do this, versus acknowledging that maybe I disagree, but if there's value to the stakeholder, as you say, maybe helping that stakeholder is the value to me.
I just want to jump in there. I remember a couple of years back there was this kind of LinkedIn spat between L&D pros, and it was about whether or not to say data informed or data led, right? And I just these like there was loads of posts about it, and I just thought this is why other departments get really exasperated by us, because we spend a lot of time. Okay, no, let me not say a lot of time. I've seen people put a lot of energy into trying to get other people to agree with like a simple piece of terminology, when actually what our colleagues want from us, what our customers want from us, is a solution that they understand. And so I think, you know, that navel gazing can be really damaging to us. So what, and also it's kind of the antithesis to learning. Like, just because something was right yesterday doesn't mean it's going to be right today. And I think rather than going around telling people what won't work and what they shouldn't do, you might recommend that they try it in a different way, but still, kind of have an open mind. I mean, I wrote in the start of my book, like, I hope someone picks this up and proves part of it wrong, or expands and elaborates on it, because it's an art as much as it is a science.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. There's been a lot of talk, I think, recently about kind of how we standardize and get more professional as an industry in the last couple of years. I think this is one of the things we're increasingly aware of. Like, when you look at other industries, like project management is top of mind for me at the minute. They have the body of knowledge. It's ever evolving, growing. It's not static. And I think sometimes we pursue that. We try and make our body of knowledge static because it makes us all feel safer, right? Once you know it, it'll never change as such. But it does kind of cement us in one place, which isn't that helpful. We've got a really good question actually come in from Chrissy. Can you talk more about how you discern that data is biased and how you can remove that from your story?
Yeah, sure. Wow, big question. So I think as part of the design for your measurements, you need to understand what level of bias is going into the answer. So if we think, I'm trying to think of this kind of a common example. All right, let's say you've asked a group of people, you've designed, you delivered your learning program or your intervention, whatever word you want to call it, and people are back on in the flow of work, and they're being asked to apply what they've learned. And you want to measure how successful they are in doing that, right? So the kind of easiest way for L&D, I should say, would be to get people to self-measure. Yeah, before I did the training, I was at this level. Afterwards, I did this level. The challenge there is there's a lot of bias, because people tend to either say they're not as good as something as they think they are, or they're much better than they are. And so the bias there is the actual individual, right? At the very difficult for L&D end of it, it's about how do we build in moments where the person is either unaware or complicit in the is unaware of the observation, so you get a real, is this person applying the things in the way that we wanted them to? And that doesn't have to be L&D doing that. It could be through management observation. It could be through someone else, especially if you think about like call center environments. It could be call listening, things like that. If the person isn't aware and they're applying it on the job, then you could be kind of sure, and if no other organizational changes have happened, that you're not getting a biased response because the person doesn't know that they're being observed. And so that's how you can remove the bias from the measurement. Removing bias from your story is kind of like ensuring you're not over-egging the pudding, right? And just telling a really truthful story of what happened. So if things went great, wonderful, talk about those. But if things didn't go well, talk about that as well, and use that as an opportunity to say, this is what we will do next time.
And I think that's quite challenging at times, right? Especially at the minute, everyone's kind of under pressure to perform, probably more so than we've ever been before. Certainly more accountable, I would suggest, than a lot of L&D teams have been in the past to their wider business. So when you talk about kind of acknowledging when something's not gone well and what you're going to do next time, maybe we'll get into this later as I'm asking a question. I'm thinking, do you think that strengthens that position, or do you think that's potentially a bit of a risk at the moment?
I think it's always been a risk, and it can depend entirely on how comfortable you feel in the business that you operate in and how candid that business can be, and how much other people at your level go, oh yeah, we all make mistakes. Like, the product team doesn't, go have a hit with every single product or every update. The sales team doesn't make every sale. The marketing team doesn't bring in the number of leads it expects with every campaign. Like, this stuff happens. So that's the way to contextualize that. But with the risk, the other thing is the accountability element. I've worked with a lot of people teams and L&D teams, and I've known it myself as well, where we want accountability because accountability leads to decision making, and decision making leads to like a seat at the table if that's something that you want. And you're only going to get that by going, this is what went wrong, but this is what we're going to do about it, and being really proactive and showing that you can think strategically about what's coming next rather than, oh, one and done. And it didn't work, so we're not going to do it again. Or it did work, so we're just going to carry on running it.
had a really interesting conversation a few months ago, actually, with sort of cross organizational C-suite leaders who said it's interesting that the table that L&D often refer to tends to only get together for those meetings when something's gone wrong. Like if everything is running perfectly well, why would they waste their time in a meeting coming up with ideas? So actually, it's quite interesting how my observation has been teams that are willing to do exactly what you've just said and say, hey, this hasn't gone well, and here's why, and here's how we're going to make sure we improve next time, whatever, actually become much more trusted within the organization. Because they're visibly holding themselves to account, they're holding themselves to a standard, as you say, like other teams do. I'm sure if anyone's ever worked in a non-L&D department, you'll be very aware that you're held to usually much clearer KPIs or expectations and targets, and you will have to explain why they haven't been hit on the occasions that they haven't been. So I think it might be a really positive move for us to do more of that, I suspect.
Yeah.
Let's talk about building the story, because this is I feel like we've covered a lot of the getting there, and I'm sure everyone at this point, I am anyway, is eager to be like, so how do I do this? How do I get hands on and start doing this in my business?
So okay, we'll do. As much as they are somewhat loathed, a PowerPoint can be your best friend in this case, or or any visual aid. But okay, so we call this the hero's journey. I didn't come up with it. It's been a story narrative mode since we started telling stories to each other in caves 2,000 years ago. It was popularized in the 80s within movie writing, and originally it had 12 steps to it. And I started out trying to fit in, the idea of a program of works into these 12 steps to play back this hero's journey to a group of stakeholders. And what I found is it was taking me about half an hour, 40 minutes to get through 12 steps. And sometimes the CEO might only have 20. So I kind of swished it down. I worked out what are the 7 steps non-L&D folk want to hear about that's going to engage them and give them enough that they can make a decision or get engaged with you. And so I came up with these 7 steps and I truncated it down. And within those 7 steps, I then took 7 areas I'd want to talk about and align them to like the journey of the hero. And for the avoidance of doubt here, the hero are the people in the program or the people you are helping. So what you're doing is you're putting your people, the people you're helping, at the center of a story that uses data and engages emotionally with senior stakeholders in the business. And the reason they do is, oh, I know those people. Oh, I'm engaged with this. Oh, look at that data. Right, I'm also engaged with this. So that's the reason why I came up with these 7 steps. And it goes a little something like this. The first one is our hero sets off. Always happens. Yep, hero sets off on a quest. This is a slide in which you talk about the data and desire. So it's the data that we wanted to change: sales scores, customer service scores, budget timelines, project times, whatever the data was, decision-making times, whatever that is, and the desire to change it. And it's like a number and a line on a slide to help people contextualize what you're talking about. The second step in the hero's journey is that the hero meets people as they go along, and they might form a fellowship, for example, right? And those people become the cohort, right? These are this group that needs helping. And this is where I would talk about a hypothesis. And I think this is really important as part of learning design, because what you're setting out is, as an L&D function, we've done our analysis based on this data and this desire. We've understood what organizational blockers might be stopping people from learning. But then actually we've analyzed it and gone, it is an L&D need. Yep, L&D can help with this. This is the hypothesis. This is how we think by running X learning, X program, people will be changed for the better. And then in the third step in the hero's journey is our group of people, our heroes, they overcome obstacles. They start to fight villains. Yeah. And that's when you talk about the program itself. This is L&D's time to shine. This is your one slide where you can go, this was the nuts and bolts of what we do. This was the months of work and iterations and trial and error. Like that, it's the program outlay. And it just gives the people in the room or the person you're talking to a brief understanding of those kind of reporting aspects. 100 people went through it. We ran 15 sessions. This is how successful it was. Here's the changes that we'll make to the program structure next time. It's just real nuts and bolts of L&D. In the next stage of the hero's journey, once the villains are starting to be defeated, the heroes are improved and they gain new skills. Right, they start leveling up at this point. On this slide, you can talk about, I've got for here, feel, how people felt about the learning. Yep, your vanity metric. Any learning objectives that you wanted to highlight and any assessments that went in, all on one slide. Big numbers on there, you know, pass rates, how people felt. Hopefully they're all positive, but if they're not, you can talk about why they're not positive and what you're going to do. And this is important because if you've got, you know, I think sometimes there's this idea that people who are senior stakeholders are almost, they're not people anymore, like they're something different, but they are, and they care deeply about their colleagues and the people in their team. That's what I found anyway. And this really sets out, you know, that emotional pull into the story. Okay, so once our heroes have got developed some new skills, they're now applying these new skills, and they're probably going to go on and fight the villain at this point in the story. And on this slide, just on one slide, you can talk about performance objectives that you wanted to see or change, any change the business saw, such as a increase in performance or a drop, and the ROI associated with that metric if you want to go here. So it's really simple. You've kind of gone, the previous slide is all about kind of the hero and how they felt, and this slide is all about what they've achieved and what the business has achieved and what they've achieved. And it goes from feeling right through to ROI really quickly. And it kind of helps tie the two things together in the audience's head. Yep. Then we get on to reflection. So after after the villain's been defeated, there's always a moment in a story where there's a point of reflection. You know, I'm thinking like hero sat on top of a mountain, sun going down, that kind of thing, and they're just taking a moment and they're taking it all in. If you think about this as a moment of reflection for the program, see whether or not it's been a roaring success, whether or not it did not meet up to the expectations, whether or not it's been a mixed bag. And let's be honest, a lot of the time it is a mixed bag. Here's where you can talk about what's next for the program. Here's what worked, we want to continue doing. Here's what didn't work and we want to change. Here's what we want to try next. And this shows that you are thinking iteratively and proactively, and you're not resting on your laurels, but understand that people and programs and learning needs to continually develop. And the final stage within stories, the hero sets off again. Think your standard trilogy. Yeah, or maybe there's an epilogue. It's the hero going off into they come down from the mountain now, they're going off into the sunset. And this is where you talk about, bring it right back to the people who are in the program. What's next for them? What other things are going to help them perform better in role, and what you're going to do about it? And this is the moment where you can almost ask for investment if you've had a really good ROI. You know, this is what we'd like to do next. Here's what we think the investment should be. And you've got this group of senior stakeholders wrapped up in your story, and they go, yes, we love our people and we love this program. We love the work you're doing, and we want you to do more of it. So yeah, that's the outline and the basic premise of it.
Okay, so I think there's a lot to dig in there. There's already a few questions come through, but please do, if you've got some questions, now is the time to start getting them into the chat, because we are officially halfway through our time together today. So in terms of, I'll start with my question because I get to ask because I'm here. So in terms of actually delivering the story, you've put it all together, you know what you want to say. You mentioned PowerPoint.
Sure.
So the thing that immediately strikes me is like the delivery of this is going to be really important. So do you tend to see this as being something you deliver in person, or do you just send the slide deck, or what approach would you suggest there?
I'd always deliver it in person. If you feel confident in running through like the slides, I think like you're facilitating a workshop. If you're using a visual, in my opinion, it should be framing the main theme of what's going on. We're not asking a group of people to read through your white paper on what you did. It's there to highlight things that you say. So 7 simple slides with some numbers, very little, you know, maybe a headline. It's just to frame what you're doing and make what you're saying resonate visually with what they're looking at.
I think that's interesting, because I think again, so often, and I'll use the C-suite as an example, but the same is true of any form of leadership, right? That kind of treating them like they're not people anymore. So often it is the white paper style report, and it's, oh, well, to keep it simple, write an executive summary on the top. So am I right in saying this is almost like a probably much more effective version of that executive summary? And then if they go, oh, can I get a copy of all that data? You can go, okay, yeah, fine, but I'm not going to walk you through that. Is that, am I kind of understanding that right?
Yeah, kind of. I don't think I'd ever be belligerent enough to go, yeah, fine. If you don't want it, I'm gonna do it. As you said there. But I think whether or not you've got one person in the room, and you can go and deliver this to one person, you can tailor it. If you've got 7 stakeholders and they all want a slightly different story, you can take 15 minutes and tailor this 7 different ways and then go and speak to individuals. But yeah, this is very much your spoken executive summary of this. And I think on that, speaking to individuals, there is a value in taking senior stakeholders through things one at a time. I started out my career in or proper office job career in sales, and one of the things we were told was, decisions don't get made by committee; they get made by individuals. So why not go and talk to 7 individuals and get them on side, rather than getting 7 of them in the room and then all the more getting lost under each other's questions or things like that. So I think if you can, yeah, create 7, still truthful, still the same story, but go and speak to those people one by one and tell them the story. Tell them something really compelling.
And I suppose that gives you the opportunity to, again, while still telling the same story, not changing any of the fundamental facts, but to slightly alter the telling to the relevant party, right? Because I think it's fair to say that perhaps the head of HR is looking for somewhat different things than the CFO, for the sake of argument.
Yeah, I think everyone likes a particular type of story. I wouldn't go and stress out about, what color scheme should I use, or what tone, or like what delivery style, or should we? I think if you're looking at a program that had multiple functions as a part of it, and actually, let's say there were people from the people team and people from finance, and there were people from R&D. If there's slightly different, you could tell one story across the top. If there's slightly different numbers, and it's going to show you, there's nothing to say that in the feel and assessment bit, you couldn't go, oh, this was the overall feeling and overall assessments and overall business change. But actually, in your department, here's what we had as well. So you can do little things like that, but I wouldn't stress out too much about it.
Cool. Well, let's dive into some questions. We got some way ahead of time that I think are relevant at this stage, and a couple in the chat now. Emma's also called out the session by Will Tellheimer recently. That it was an exceptional session. I think you touched on LTEM earlier, Neil. I mean, maybe it's a good opportunity. That kind of, I don't want to say there's a war between Kirkpatrick and LTEM, but if there was, I feel like I'd be at the front line screaming. That's what are your thoughts on kind of choosing between them? Is it massively important? Have you found it to make a huge practical difference day to day in terms of what you do, or is it more to do again with what stakeholders want?
I don't mind either. I think use whatever tool is right for you. I think if you don't work in L&D, the person you're telling this to doesn't care which model you've used. I think it's good to understand. Models are wonderful because they give you a framework and a direction of travel, and they let you explore stuff bit by bit, and you can experiment, and that is wonderful. I think LTEM is a more granular way of looking at it, and probably is more accessible for people nowadays. But Kirkpatrick has a simplicity to it, which I think can speak to people if they're just starting out. I think what's important is, like, I spliced bits of them together kind of almost by accident over the years before I went into proper L&D, and someone went, oh, do you know there's a mod, just someone's already done that? Oh yeah, oh damn it, I should go and use that rather than fuddling around here. And I think work out what's best for you and best for the story that you're going to tell. But yeah, like I said, anyone outside of L&D really isn't going to care which method you used. But they hopefully you're going to build up enough kudos and credibility with them that they are going to trust you when you say that this is a realistic number and this is what happened. So whichever one helps you get to that point.
Brilliant. And that practicality above all else is never never a bad way to go. So Dylan's asked, be curious to know your thoughts around how external training providers can demonstrate the impact of their programs to clients beyond the vanity metrics using data storytelling. So I've been in exactly this position in a past role, and yeah, that's tricky. Neil, over to you. Just a nice, easy one.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually that difficult. It depends on the client. So I've never really had a client ask me, can we, they don't, again, because, you know, it's people buying programs of learning don't often know a lot about L&D. And so they're not going, oh, what vanity metrics are you going to measure? I think be proactive and talk to them about what are their success measures and what do they want to see. So when I'm working with a client, we'll on like a custom built training program, we call it, we'll go, if this was to get to ROI, what ROI would you want to see? And now a lot of the times they go, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not doing this because we're thinking about return on investment. We're thinking about a performance issue. And so what you'll need to do is then go to them. Let's say it was staff attrition. Yeah, something's come up in the engagement survey, and people are saying my manager never has a one-to-one, right? And the business believes that if the managers had one-to-ones, people would stay longer, or they progress in their roles more quickly. So then you've got to go to them and go, okay, so what you want is me to write a training program and having a one-to-one. Yep. Let's think about it like this. What's the performance metric here? Managers have a one-to-one. Okay, great. Your hypothesis then is if managers have a one-to-one, you can talk to your clients like this. If your managers have one-to-ones, how much do you think attrition will lower? And it gets them starting to think about what actually is a performance metric after a learning objective. And they go, well, let's say it'll lower, you know, people leaving the business saying they aren't having one. We're at about 20% attrition now. Let's say it'll go down by 10%. Okay. Now there is a numerical or a monetized value of attrition. So cost of hire and cost of training. Yeah. And you go, well, if we can reduce that by 10% and we can prove that nothing else in the business changed during that time and that only the learning that we did affected that, right? Then we can measure it. And then you can go back to your board, whoever person that's buying this, and go, we did this training at X amount, it delivered this return on investment. But that's a lot of steps for someone to go through. But I think if you want to start talking about it, yeah, get them to think about what performance metric are they moving because of this? How are they going to measure what business outcome that's going to change? And then what is the monetized amount on that? And I think looping something else in here just to think about is then there will be an internal finance team that maybe is already measuring this, or in a bigger organization, a performance management team that's measuring these kind of metrics. And it would be then going and talking to them and working out what it is as well. But yeah, I hope that helps. Kind of a long-winded explanation there.
No, I think the challenge certainly I had in that kind of space was that a lot, as you say, a lot of people who are buying in, especially off the shelf content, which is where I was for a while, they are not really looking for this to make specific measurable changes in their business. They're doing it to fill usually a very short-term tactical need. We require up-to-date compliance training so that no one can sue us, was like the leading reason for buying that kind of content when I was there. And we offered, hey, we can partner with you, we can measure this, we can track for real on the ground compliance versus tick box. And actually we found that not in all cases, there's always exceptions, but in the vast majority of cases there was little to no appetite. And it ended up where we kind of had to step back and go, why are we forcing this on stakeholders and customers in this case that don't want it? Because we know it's the right thing to do, therefore it makes us feel good to do it. It's like, that's probably not a good enough reason, actually. Let's pivot that effort somewhere more valuable.
Sure.
But no, I think if you have got someone who does want it, I think that would be a really good way of going about doing it. The next question, which came in ahead of time, actually relates to our next question on the slide. We often kind of, especially, we kind of talk about all the kind of pressures on L&D, and often it's to start doing this a different way, or approach this, or try something new. And I wondered if you could talk us through some, obviously not detailed examples as in who and where, but some kind of ideas of when and where you have seen this work.
Yeah. The interesting thing I think on this question is, as I look at it now, it's the first time I've seen it. Where and when have you seen it work? It's define what you mean by it working. Right. I'll give an example first. I was asked to look at a program that a company had rolled out, and they wanted to see if they could apply like reverse engineer it. So could you take the results from what we've seen and look at the design and tell us whether or not this program delivered this performance outcome? Because we've seen an uptick in performance, we're just not sure if it was there because of the learning, or it's because of an organizational change that we'd made. Well, long story short, I reversed engineer it, and I went, no, there's no way to tell if this learning was responsible for this outcome. So this number you've got at the end of this performance increase and the associated ROI is not actually attributable. It was attributable to an organizational change that had been made. So in the sense of it working, we got to the truth of the matter, but there were some people who weren't very happy with the answer. The advantage of that, though, was that they knew not to go out and go, look at how great this was. Because if they'd repeated it without the org change, there would have been any change in the performance. And so the question there would have been, why did you repeat this if you didn't know it was going to, why is it, why was the result so great the first time and not good the second time? So work is one thing. I think, yeah, another time was actually when I was starting out with this, and there was I'm trying to keep this as vague as possible without keeping it meaningful. So customer services team, and the tickets for one particular team kept loading up, kept going up. And one day, one of the managers said, why is this team not answering any of these tickets? And they were, oh, the two people that used to man that desk don't work here anymore. No one had realized that there was no one supporting the product because it was supported in another language. And there was this kind of real rush then. We're like, oh, we need to, we've got to find these two people, screen them, go through the hiring process, get them upskilled to be able to support the product, then give them the customer services skills. And it's kind of a 3 to 4 month process. And what I did was I looked across the business, and I noticed there were some other people who did speak that language and already were supporting another product. So they knew the culture, they knew the products a little bit, but not to support it. They knew the internal systems. We didn't have to spend time hiring them, didn't have to spend time training them. And we looked at their capacity management. And actually, if we took these two people and said, actually took some of your time every day to do this, would it really impact their capabilities or the teams? And so I pulled all this data together, and I sat with the head of department and with the people team and said, I think we can train these two without impacting the capability. It will save us X time, which equals X money. Also means you don't have to hire two people immediately. So the cost saving there. It'll take me about a week to set up and 2 weeks to roll out. And it also means we'll stop losing customers, because it was a subscription service, so people were just cancel. And because I'd put it together and presented it as this story, and we put bits about these two individuals, then I'd have more promotion opportunities and because of different products that they serve and all that kind of stuff. Everyone went, yeah, let's go for it. Let's do it. So I presented the story beforehand as a pitch deck. I went, this is what it'll be if it works, from data and desire right through to what's next, if it works. And they went, yeah, let's do it. And it did. And it did work. And so I thought, yeah, that's a really good example of how it can be a very powerful tool in convincing people to go, oh, yeah, L&D are great. Let's give them a listen.
So I think that's a really fascinating example, because that touched on the idea that, again, moving away from this being a report, you can do this to gain initial buy-in, which I think so often when we're having sort of chats about, oh, this is the challenge I'm facing right now, it's really quite difficult often to get businesses to be like, yes, I will invest the resource, the time, the money, the whatever you need to deliver this thing. So is that something you would generally suggest? Is obviously, if possible, if it can be done, if the data is available, to sort of preempt the activity with the story to gain buy-in?
I think so much of L&D is based on belief, and the belief that it will work. How a business approaches L&D can change with the CEO. Yeah, it's really and how they view and value it. And I think it's always good to be able to break down the data that you're getting into a compelling story, so that you can use that to engage people. So rather than just doing a proposal and being like, here's what we think's wrong, we've got a solution for it, shall we begin? You go, okay, well, here's what you've told us, here's what our experience is telling us, let's dig into the data a little more. Can we work together on this bit? And you break it down so that if from an external point of view, you go, here are the stages we can go through together, and hopefully we can deliver this thing at the end, if that's what they want, actually. Yeah. And if they don't, you go, okay, well, here's how we've worked with previous departments if you're internal. Here's how we've worked with previous customers if you're external. And you use it as a way to draw people towards your L&D offering.
Brilliant stuff. So we're into questions now, I think, definitely. We did get a lot of them ahead of time. People were very on the ball. I've been very impressed. So if you're here and you have questions, please do chuck them in as well, and I'll make sure we answer yours too. The first one then goes right back to the idea of source data. We touched on bias earlier, but probably more fundamentally, the question is, where are the good sources of data in organizations in your experience?
Yeah, so first port of call, look outside of L&D or of HR. So not your HRIS, not your L&D or your LMX or your LSP. Go to the CRM. Go to the data that captures the performance that people are making decisions on about how the business operates. So if there is, look at the sales numbers. Who's hitting target, who's not, who's over target, why? Is it something L&D can do? Is it a skill, it's knowledge of behavior? If it's market conditions, if it's a reshuffle in the team, that's not something you can help with, but go and look at that data. Again, with the CRM, you'll have things like customer satisfaction or call rates. So, customers are really unhappy with our callers. Is it the way the call's being handled? Or actually, is it because they have to press 9 different options before they get through to someone? So make sure it's something you can help with, so a knowledge, a skill, or behavior. Yeah. And if you can't help with it, highlight that out to the business. You've asked for this piece of training because you think that people aren't being polite enough on the phone, but we listened in, and against what you measure them at the moment, they're great. The challenge is that someone's spending 15 minutes trying to get through a confusing, call list before they speak to someone, or you don't have any people anymore and it's all botted, and that's why it's so small. But you can recommend that out to the business. Like, I'd look at these. Once you've done those, talking to finance can be a good place as well, because especially things like budgets that are always over on overspend. Like, is that because you've got leaders who have poor fiscal knowledge, or is it because is it to do with underfunding in the team, or what's causing that? So those are 3 kind of good areas or good sets of people to talk with. And then if you want to get round to looking at the HRIS, then things like the employee engagement survey can be a place to start if you want to hit the ground running and focus on something that's very people focused. It's kind of I think it's a feel good piece of work, and I'm saying like it's a bad thing. It's great to make people feel good. I don't mean it like that. I don't want to come across as too cynical. But working on stuff like that could be a nice kind of marquee piece while you get into some of the more nitty gritty stuff as well.
Brilliant. Next question. It kind of feels like an inevitable question at the moment. People will probably guess what technology it's going to reference. Is there any opportunity, and do you think there is value in various forms of, I'm going to add the word generative to the following AI terminology there. Do you, what role do you see that's playing in this? Do you see it as playing a useful role in this space?
Yeah, I think, if I think about the way I approach data storytelling, I think it'd be great at whipping up slides quickly. If you've got a basic template, you need to plug stuff in with a few prompts. I think if you struggle to tell a story, you might be able to, with the right prompts and some examples of your own emails. But again, there's the ethics of feeding an AI your own work. You might be able to get it to create the narrative for you if you give it the model to follow and what data you want it, and it might help you. The first time you're like, what am I going to say? I'm completely lost. Actually, I'll talk through that. So I think that could be useful. When it comes to analysis, I was tinkering around with ChatGPT a few months back, and I was feeding it what I consider quite large data sets from a customer. Now, I mean, at this point last year, you did that, and it just went, no, don't know what you're doing, please don't. And actually, towards the end of last year, I could put it in, and I could ask if it could spot trends, and it would have a good go at spotting trends. The challenge was that I then had to tell it what trends to spot. So it still required a lot of prompting. And then when I tried to check it against my own working, my own Excel sheet with its formulas, it would quite often trip itself up and wouldn't get the cells correct or the columns correct. So you'd really have to narrow down, like, oh, didn't you mean C3 rather than C4? And it goes, oops, sorry. So I think it could have some good uses getting you up and running, but where it's at the moment, I probably want to recheck it's working before I went and said, this is the ROI from this program. Yeah, I'd want to go in and make sure that I'd talk to someone like someone who works in finance, which I quite often do, and go, can you check the maths on this for me?
So that leads us into what may be our last question, depending on time, which is about L&D skill sets. So there's for a long time, I think there's been this call for L&D to develop their data skills, which is quite a broad term, shall we say?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts around what are the kind of data focus skills, if you will, or things we need to know how to do to be able to use this data well?
I think you need to understand some basic concepts, like the difference between correlation and causation. Like that I think that's there. I think some basic stuff around how you can pull data and how you use the data set. So if you've got constructed or unconstructed data, and what's coming in and what's going to be useful. And then another skill set is storytelling. Yeah. So can you communicate clearly? Can you get to a point? I think within storytelling, it's something that I constantly work at, is can you be information dense and short sentenced? So can you get to the point? I mean, that's a long-winded way of saying, can you get to the point? I think is another skill set there. About the analysis, I just always ask why. I think getting really good at asking why in a way that doesn't make someone else feel that you're pulling at a thread or makes them feel threatened, because people do care a lot about their work, and contextualizing that what you're doing is to help everybody and that no one's going to be in trouble. I think that's a good skill set. And I don't know where that would fall inside communications, but I think that's something that is really, really useful for people working in L&D.
That last one I find fascinating, because I think of all the areas that we touch in terms of L&D, marketing, product, all of them talk about the importance of continually asking why. That pattern should, I think, in some ways be quite reassuring to us that actually other teams are doing this. And so we shouldn't feel like we're, like you say, we shouldn't necessarily fear being the difficult one here. I can tell you from experience, like product teams do not stop asking why. Because ultimately the goal is, I've succeeded if we decide not to build something. That's a big success from a product perspective. I wonder if, maybe we could do with having a bit more of that view as well. Good news, we didn't build 16 additional pieces of e-learning this year. This saved us X amount of money. Woohoo!
Yeah, right. Yeah, very good.
Fantastic. Well, we are coming up to our last few minutes together. So I want to just kind of cap off with one quick question, and then I want to make sure we can share details of how people can get in touch with you, Neil. If I'm sat watching this live or in a recording and I think, right, I want to get started with this, I need to get this rolling, where do I start? Because I'm guessing I'm probably not going to nail it first time. What are my first steps to start moving towards making this normal in my business?
The first steps towards making it normal in your business are to go and look for those data sources that I talked about and start talking to those stakeholders that are responsible for them about how you can help them, and get used to creating a narrative ahead of time based on those 7 steps that we looked at earlier. A more cynical way of getting started would be also to buy my book, Narrative and Numbers, 7 Steps to Prove L&D's Value. That would also be a really, really good way of getting started on this. And if you are watching this back, if you go to alignlearndo.com, navigate to our books, you'll find narrative numbers, and you can get 30% off at checkout if you use the code THIRST30. So THIRST 30.
Lovely. Well, thank you for that. We shall grab a copy. It is a very good read. I must admit, I enjoyed it. Found it very useful, actually. Now, if people want to get in touch with you directly with questions, ideas, thoughts, feedback, where's the best place to get hold of you?
I mean, I'm pretty much on LinkedIn all the time. So Neil John Cunningham, can't miss me. I'm on there. Or just neil@alignlearndo.com if you want to make it a bit more formal. Then that'll go straight to my email.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to come and share this stuff with us. I found this fascinating. I hope everyone watching has found this useful as well. Please do share in the comments kind of your takeaway, what you're going to go and do after this. Because as with all these things, we often gather in webinars and at conferences and we nod and we agree, and then we go back to our workplaces and nothing changes. And I would really encourage you, if you're coming to these monthly sessions, try and go away from every single one with just one thing you're actively going to do in your workplace, in the real world after attending the session. Our next LinkedIn Live is on the 25th of February. It's at 3 p.m. again. I'm going to be joined by Greg Arthur, and we're going to be discussing product mindset and the practical elements we can pull as L&D professionals from the world of product design and management to make us more effective and more efficient. Thank you once again to Thirst for putting on this whole series of events. We'll see you in the comments, and if not in the comments, I'll see you again on the 25th of February.